Good afternoon. Now we will start with the second session. And we have three speakers in the second session. Our first speaker is Geshe Kelsang Wangmo. Geshe Kelsang Wangmo is a German-born Tibetan Buddhist nun. Since 2004, she has been teaching Buddhist philosophy classes in English in Dharamsala. She took her ordination in 1991 and enrolled in the traditional Geshe curriculum at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in Dharamsala. A scholar and a teacher, Geshe Ma, after 21 years of intensive study, became the first woman to receive the prestigious Geshe Ma degree in 2011. Geshe Kelsang Wangmo will speak on relevance of Nalanda wisdom in the 21st century. Geshe Kelsang Wangmo.
Thank you. Well, Tashidele and greetings from Germany to everyone. I feel very honored to be given the opportunity to speak at this conference on the legacies of the Nalanda tradition. As was just announced, I will talk about the relevance of the Nalanda tradition in the 21st century. Of course, it is hard to believe that there could ever be a time when the Nalanda tradition is not relevant to humankind, given that it addresses our most basic need for lasting satisfaction and happiness. It addresses that need because it presents the profound and extensive means not only to attain liberation from all dissatisfactory existence, but also to actualize our fullest potential in the form of the awakened state of a Buddha. However, the Nalanda tradition certainly enjoys greater relevance at this point in time, not least due to the present day situation or circumstances, which are especially conducive for reaching a wider audience, and thus allow much greater access to this unique tradition. More people than ever before have access to the teachings of the Buddha, literally at the click of a mouse. The works by the great Nalanda masters like Nagarjuna, Buddhapalita, Chandakirti, and so forth are readily available online, even translated into different languages. Live streams and recordings of the oral teachings given by contemporary masters of the Nalanda tradition, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, can be followed on YouTube and other platforms. And then there is social media, like WeChat, WhatsApp, and so forth, which provide those who are interested in different parts of the world with the opportunity to ask questions and discuss difficult points. At the same time, there is a much greater openness to different philosophical ideas that only 1 or 2 centuries ago were frowned upon. In the past, especially people in Europe and on the American continent, which have been heavily influenced by the Judeo-Christian traditions, did not have the same kind of open-mindedness and acceptance of the rich ancient Indian philosophy as they have today. Not least since Eastern philosophy may have been regarded as contradicting Judeo-Christian ideas and thus as blasphemous. Yet with better education and the weakening of the influence of the church and other religious institutions, that attitude has slowly changed and has given way to a deeper appreciation and even recognition of the value of the ancient Indian wisdom. Moreover, with this scientific and democratic development, people have been afforded a newfound freedom to pursue their interests and learn about different traditions. Also, the material development has made its contribution, since it has been providing people with the leisure and the opportunity to travel to India or even Tibet, to visit the monasteries and nunneries there, and learn directly from the example and the words of the living masters of the Nalanda tradition, who are embodiments of its teachings. Yet to truly benefit from the profound wisdom of the Nalanda masters requires a certain level of intellectual sophistication. That is nowadays provided by the greatly improved level of global education. Global literacy rates have been climbing over the course of the last 2 centuries. Similarly, secondary and higher education have also seen drastic growth, with global average years of schooling being much higher now than maybe 100 years ago. Traditional academic skills that are primarily content knowledge-based have given ways to skills that are associated with deeper learning, such as analytical reasoning, complex problem solving, and teamwork. Now, those are quite similar to the traditional methods of studying the Nalanda philosophy, which involves the study of complex texts, the reflection on their profound meaning through applying logical reasoning, and teamwork in the form of logical debate. Hence, in the 21st century, we have become much better equipped to explore the profound and extensive principles of the Nalanda tradition. Yet one of the main reasons for the greater relevance of this tradition at the present time is, of course, the development and progress of modern science. Today, the influence of science is so pervasive that every culture and every society can feel its impact. Although modern science certainly has its limitations, it has greatly contributed to the well-being of humankind. It provides us with a greater knowledge of the material world, with new medicines and better treatment facilities, with new technologies, and it has simply made our life easier, at least on a physical level. And due to the parallels between science and the Nalanda tradition with regard to their methods and many of their concepts, a knowledge of modern science is taught in schools and universities can certainly help in the study and comprehension of Nalanda philosophy. The scientific method is basically an empirical method of acquiring knowledge, which involves logical and systematic research, as well as critical inquiry that draws logical inferences about the things we cannot perceive with our senses, such as atoms and subatomic particles, based on observed facts that are evident to our senses. This is very similar to the Buddhist approach of applying critical, systematic, and logical analysis in order to explore the nature of reality. Students, in particular of the Nalanda tradition, are trained to be skeptics and to only accept a proposition after examining logical evidence. This is based on the Buddha's own advice when he said, just as you would test gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it, so too should you examine my words. Do not accept them out of respect. However, the two systems, Buddhism and science, differ in that science focuses in general mainly on the outer material world, while Buddhism explores the inner workings of the mind. And this is why Buddhism is often referred to as science of the mind. Moreover, while scientific observation is limited to the 5 senses, which are of course enhanced through instruments like telescopes, microscopes, and so forth, in Buddhism, empirical observation is not limited only to the 5 senses, because it includes observations derived through meditation. Similar to the role of modern scientific method in the inquiry of the material world, Buddhist meditation that is based on study and contemplation is considered a means of investigating reality. In particular, the reality of our inner mental world. Also, some of the central concepts of the Buddhist tradition are very similar to scientific findings. For instance, the idea of subtle impermanence, which refers to the idea that things such as the mind and the physical world are constantly changing, is consistent with the modern scientific conception of the universe, which holds that everything is in constant motion. There are likewise parallels between the philosophical concept of shunyata, or emptiness, as formulated by Nalanda masters like Nagarjuna, and the physical concept of reality set forth by quantum physics. Both systems negate a fundamental essence of reality, and the views of the Nobel Prize-winning Danish physicist Niels Bohr and the German theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg seem to support the Buddhist view that physical particles do not exist as independent phenomena, but can only be said to exist in dependence on the process of observation and conceptual designation. Some physicists also point out the similarities between the modern understanding of time and the special theory of relativity and the Madhyamika thought on the relative truth. These are just some of the examples which have led many contemporary scientists to assert that Buddhist ideas are to a large extent compatible with scientific findings of reality. And it is alleged that the German theoretical physicist Albert Einstein himself said, if there's any religion that would cope with modern scientific needs, it would be Buddhism. However, not only are Buddhism and science in many ways compatible, Buddhist knowledge, in particular that of the Nalanda tradition, can greatly contribute to the knowledge of modern scientists. Modern science started to develop around 400 years ago as a result of a series of events that are commonly referred to as the scientific revolution. Interestingly, at that time, scientists were mainly focused on the material, objective world and had no interest in the subjective mind. They sought to arrive at universal objective truth, independent of any particular observer's viewpoint or state of mind. Scientists at that time felt there was no need to deal with the troublesome subject of consciousness in order to explain the universe, for they were looking for truth that everyone could agree with, a world that exists independent of an observer. Yet they completely failed to recognize that without consciousness, there would be no observation of the external world, and thus there wouldn't be any science. The development in several scientific fields has shown that consciousness cannot be sidelined. Quantum physics, for example, suggests that at the atomic level, the act of observation affects the reality that is observed. And even on a coarser level, it is clear that observation of an objective reality is impossible, since the external world is observed by a mind that is completely subjective. In addition to that, modern physics has shown that the external world in the form of colors, sound, and so forth does not exist the way it appears to us, which is very similar to the Buddhist idea of our mistaken perception of reality. What we perceive as colors, for instance, actually refers to light waves of various frequencies, which cause the receptors in the retina of our eyes to send nerve impulses to our visual cortex, resulting in our eye consciousness perceiving color. Therefore, with the help of our eyes and the brain, our mind translates light into color. This process is similar to the perception of sound. With the help of our ears and the brain, our ear consciousness translates pressure waves into sound. Thus, as the Nobel Prize-winning Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger said, every man's world picture is and always remains a construct of his mind and cannot be proved to have any other existence. All these findings show that consciousness is central to our experiences and that a better understanding of its nature can be extremely helpful to a better scientific understanding of ourselves and of the world in which we live. However, since we cannot measure or weigh consciousness in any conventional scientific way, there are currently no scientific methods to gaining knowledge of the mind. This is where the explanations presented in particular in the Nalanda tradition, grounded in Buddhist contemplations and meditations, can be extremely beneficial, since they provide detailed descriptions of the mind, its objects, its functions, and so on, which we can of course verify if we practice the same contemplations and meditations ourselves. This tradition can certainly make great contributions and has been doing so for quite some time now. In modern psychology, for instance, especially in the fields of moral psychology and positive psychology, and various modern therapists have written on the relationship between Buddhism and psychotherapy. Spiritual practices like meditation have been compared to cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, and its positive physiological and neurological effects have been the subject of extensive research in recent years. But apart from contributing to scientific knowledge, the Nalanda tradition is also extremely beneficial in helping us to cope with the everyday challenges of the 21st century. The main aim of the Buddhist teaching is, of course, to benefit sentient beings through the removal of suffering. This does not just refer to the goals of leading a person to future liberation and enlightenment, but also to a person's general mental and physical well-being on a day-to-day basis, right here and right now. The material development, as well as the fast pace and the pressures of modern life, have led to many new problems that are particularly connected to the mind. Stress-related conditions such as insomnia and restlessness, anxiety disorders, depression, feelings of loneliness and isolation, self-loathing, eating disorders, and so forth. These are just some of the mental disorders which are being reported across different cultures in all parts of the world. They are among the leading causes of worldwide disability, especially in young people, dramatically affect human society, and due to the connection of body and mind, also result in many physical ailments. Now, Buddhism offers numerous different meditational techniques, such as mindfulness, that are scientifically proven to be highly effective and in reducing and even removing these mental problems, and in replacing them with positive states of mind, such as inner peace, self-confidence, and contentment. Also, on a physical level, they're shown to have a positive impact, for they can lead to lower blood pressure, increased reaction time and motor skills, a stronger immune system, and so on. But to make Buddhist meditation most effective, it is helpful first to develop an understanding of what the mind actually is, of the qualities and workings of consciousness and especially of the different types of emotions. In particular, the texts of the Nalanda tradition provide very clear and extensive descriptions of the different types of emotions. Those that are harmful to ourselves and others, such as hatred and aversion, and those that are beneficial, like love and compassion. Additionally, they provide us with explanations based on logical presentations of, for instance, the ultimate nature of reality and the interdependence of all phenomena, which help to deepen our understanding and make the meditational techniques we apply to reduce negative emotions and increase positive ones more effective. Cultivating these beneficial emotions is the most effective way to not only the development of personal well-being and happiness, but also to address many of the global problems we are currently faced with. So these are just a few of the reasons why the Nalanda tradition is particularly relevant in the 21st century. And that's why it is so crucial for us to make an extra effort to preserve it and make its many important ideas more widely available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anika Samamala. Our next speaker is Mr. Tenzin Lodin. Tenzin Lodin did his schooling at Tibetan Children's Village with a major in science and mathematics. He then joined Tibetan Medical and Astroscience College, where he studied Tibetan astroscience for 5 years and did a one-year internship under the guidance of senior astrologers at the Astro department. With his appointment as a Tibetan astroscience lecturer in March 2014, he regularly taught at the college for 6 years. Besides teaching, he has served as an interpreter at the international conferences for Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan astroscience scholars. Since 2006, he has been active with the Peace Jam Foundation, a nonprofit working closely with Nobel Peace laureates. On January 2, 2020, he was appointed as the head of the new established Astroscience Outreach and Development Department, Mensikang. In 2021, he was appointed as a member of Tukdam Research Collaboration Team. He was one of the presenters at the recently held 20th World Congress of Psychophysiology. Tenzin will speak on the practice of Tukdam.
Screen condition. it is either perfected organizational skills or a mere coincidence that I am in the second part of the talk, because the topic that I'm assigned is about something that comes at the very end of our life, that is when death comes. So respected Geshe-la, respected Gyala, and everyone. So the topic that I'm assigned is the practice of Tuktam. So though the topic, my topic might seem a little away from the main domain, but I very much believe this is very much part of the subjects that we are discussing for the day. So to open up, I have this screen. So this is what I believe, the picture representation that I have is what I believe is arguably the earliest depiction of focused attention and mindfulness in a way, because as you know, it is a depiction of having the Dharma wheel at the very center with the two deers, right and left, representing male and female. Because when you talk about Tuktam, it is in a way, it's about meditation. Because in Buddhist learning, we talk about Tösam Gomsam as Kiran rightly mentioned this morning. When you talk about Tösam Gomsam, it's all about first hearing the Dharma, and then you analyze whether the words that you have heard is actually, something that is beneficial or not. And finally, when it comes to perfected everything, then it's the stage of meditation. And Tuktam is what we usually call as the post-mortem meditative state. So it is our tradition that when we begin anything, we start with our offering, and there is no one more apt than His Holiness, the Great 14th Dalai Lama, to make our offerings. And in particular with this Tuktam topic, because it is His Holiness, the Great 14th Dalai Lama, who single-handedly put it on the world map, and it is for us to visualize it, and for the Western and Indian science aspects to analyze into the subject. And the words that I have subscribed here to make my offering. So I've subscribed the words that are offered by Jeremiah to make an offering to Gautama Buddha, because I found this word very, it's picture perfect to what I would offer to His Holiness. So as a gesture, can you draw it? So when we talk about Tuktam, so it can be talked in many aspects. So I would rather be interested to make the ground first. So when you talk about this in our Tantric practice, we talk about the generation and the realization or the result aspect. So here in the more of the general context, we talk about life and death, or in a way, it's about formation and dissolution. So it's not something like I am endorsing Tibetan medicine or Tibetan Buddhist aspect, but whenever we talk about the Eastern culture, we have to talk about the 5 elements as the very center topic. And when you talk about the 5 elements, so we have to talk in a way that, when we talk about the very formation, be it with the formation of this earth, or be it with the formation of a human body or any other sentient beings. So we talk about this array being the way we form the life. So to put it into context, when you talk about space, it is the vast where everything is in a possibility. And when you talk about the wind, it is the slightest movement. Because when you talk about element, it can be discussed in many aspects, but most importantly, we have to discuss elements in the aspects of these energies. So when you talk about the wind, it is all the movements. So the mobility comes into the play. And when you talk about the fire, it is when the wind elements does the movements in the so-called space elements, what usually happens is there is the formation of friction, and friction is a generation of heat, and therein the fire element kicks in. And when that friction comes up, and after a certain time, then there is a process of condensation wherein the fire elements condenses into the water molecules. And then finally solidification occurs, and that's when we have the earth element. So that's the formation, and then we live the life or whatever it is. And then at the end of it, when everything is in the downfall, when we have lived the zenith, and when we are in the downfall, then the dissolution or the completion or the death occurs. And that's when it occurs in the reverse stage, where we have everything in the reverse mode. So earth dissolving into the water, and water dissolving into the fire, fire dissolving into the wind, and wind dissolving into space, and so forth. So we have a very beautiful Tibetan word for this. We have this word called Timrim. So the stanza that I have subscribed here is from Yushi, the principal text on Tibetan medicine. So it talks about, as I said before, the energies, what makes it all possible, because every entity on this earth, be it tangible or non-tangible, is a product of 5 elements. So when you talk about the earth element, they say without earth, nothing is formed. And without water, there is no cohesion because cohesive force is missing. And without fire, what His Holiness prefers to call heat, then it cannot mature, the product cannot be matured. And then without wind, there is no growth. And to facilitate the growth, there has to be a room for this. And that's where space element kicks in. So the assembly of these 5 elements makes everything possible when they are in a balanced aspect. So that's when everything is in joyous state. And when these are not in concordant or not in the position of a balance, then that's when we have the trouble coming up. So as I said before, so when these 5 elements dissolves into one into another, when these elements wanes, when the energy goes to the downfall, then at a time when everything is up, we have this thing called death and dying. So the reason why I have mentioned death and dying, because I find it very interesting the way we see the death, because the modern science, and particularly the doctors and so forth, when they pronounce someone as death, that is what we usually call the clinical death. That is when the cessation of cardiac and respiratory function happens. Whereas in the Buddhist aspect, the person is not dead. We say it's in the dying process. And we also have the word chiva verse. So chiva is in its present form, saying that it's a process that is very much in action. So that's why, when someone passes away, as per the Tibetan astroscience, when we do the horoscope for the disease, we advise the person or the family that the person has to be in its present state for at least 3.5 days, because the internal breathing is happening. So only after the cessation of the internal breathing, we can pronounce the person as complete dead. And that's when you can do all the disposal, be it with the burial or be it with the funeral or whatever it is. So in a way, when we talk about Tuktam, it's something that comes at the very end of this. So to understand Tuktam, first we have to understand the way everything dissolves. So when you talk about the having lived the life, having mastered the practice, and then only after, at the time of death, Tuktam comes up. And when you talk about the Tuktam, so even in the word itself, as I don't know if you have noticed it or not. So the word I have used is Tukdam. So this is the latest word that we have come up, because earlier when this subject was new in the domain, so there are different spellings to the word. Now Tukdam has been finalized because of its phonetic benefit, so that every literature that can be published can be in this domain, so that we have a uniformity in this aspect also. So in a way, it shows about how new this topic is to the Western aspects. So as I said before, when even having the doctor pronounce someone as dead, we believe the person is dying because the internal breathings are happening. And only after 3.5 days, that's for the normal person. But in the words of Gautama Buddha, once it was said that if a great king has passed, 7 days has to be kept. Or even in the words of Sangyoso Rinpoche, when a noble person who is pronounced learned passes away, 7 days has to be kept. So this very much shows that the practice very much reflects when the person passes away. Even when someone say if the person is in Tuktam or not, once his own as a great Foreign Dharma advises that it has to be analyzed that how the person has lived his life. So this is the very litmus test to see if the person is in Tuktam or not. So as I briefly said at the front, when you talk about the internal breathing, so it has to be, it's something that is arcane in a way because it has not been decoded so much in the other literatures. But when you talk about the our Buddhist context, we say that it has to be from the grosser, subtle, and more subtle, or the extreme subtle. So when you talk about the grosser level, it's something that I have explained before. So in the Buddhist context, we talk about the 25 grosser level of dissolution, where we have this earth dissolving into water. When earth dissolves into water, what happens is we have the weakening of our body, wherein you don't feel the strength in it. And many a times when a person goes through this in his hospital bed or home, wherever it is, the person usually says that, pull me up, because he feels like he is or she is being pushed down. So this is being experienced. And when the water dissolves into fire, you see the shrinking of all the liquid elements in the body. And that also when the person does not really hear the external noises and sounds and so forth. And then when fire dissolves into, it's when you don't feel the warmth or the heat element present in the body. And that's when the person is said to be not smelling anything outside. And when the wind element dissolves into consciousness or the space, we usually say that that's the time when it is generally said that that's when the modern doctors say the person has passed away. And that's when in the Tibetan literature context, we say that the 10 wind movements have gone into what we call the central channel or the Uma, because usually the right and the left channel, the Kyangma and Roma makes most of the play. And at the time of your passing away, that's when the central channel makes its entry into the main course. So then when you talk about the subtle, that's when we talk about the 80 or the 80 different conceptions. So when you talk about, or in a more general context, we say the 3 visions. So that's the mind of the luminous appearance or the whitish appearance, or second is the mind of the luminous radiance, that is the reddish appearance, radiance. And then third is the mind of the luminous immanence, that is the black near attainment. So these is, in a way, when you put it into a general context or for a more clear understanding, what is usually said that when you talk about the grosser level, it's like living the life in the day-to-day life from the morning till you go to the bed. It is more like the grosser level where you have all the senses working. You see, you touch, you feel everything. And the subtle is more like the dream state where you have a body, but it's a body minus all the, touch and then extreme. Now understanding, we say that that's something that we cannot utilize or we cannot bring into action in our living. That's something that can only be brought into action when we are at this time of death. That's when the Chivavise or the clear light of death comes in. So generally, when we say meditation, as you know, meditation is that we talk about familiarization. So in our day-to-day life, our way of living and our diet and lifestyles, when these are very much in balanced state, when these very much helps in our practice, so we familiarize ourselves more into the living a wholesome life, and that very much reflects, be it in your dream, having a more positive dream, or when it's time to pass us away, it helps us to ready ourselves to tukdam or whatever other achievement we have it. So before I talk on this, I would like to say that I'm very amateurish in this part. So this is never my specialization. I'm not trying to say anything with this because this is something that's way over my head, but still, as a custom, I have to say this. So, and the teachings that I have subscribed here are mostly from the words and wisdom of great masters of our contemporary times. So tuning to what they have advised, because, one of the Rinpoche that I cannot name here said that it's difficult to mention what really attributes, because when you talk about tukdam, it's what you realize when you have even lived your life and when you are in that stage. So whether you have practiced this or not, or that, you cannot say, because tukdam has happened and you cannot return to say that, oh, this practice led me to have this and that. But in the general context, when you look into the great masters who have lived in the yester centuries and so forth, So these practices has been at the forefront of the practices that they have accomplished and they have mastered while they are alive, so that it has helped them to be in a state of tukdam when they passes away. So the first is the practice of emptiness. That's something that all the masters have commonly attributed to shunyata. And then second is the making use of the three exalted bodhis. So we talk about the kusum lamke, so wherein we talk about taking the death stage as the dharmakaya and taking the bhargava stage as the sambhogakaya and taking the birth stage as the nirmanakaya and so forth. So this is something that is very at the top of what we would call the highest yoga tantra. So when you talk about these, so it is talking about tantric practice. So that's something which is not available for everyone, because to reach certain level of these practices, you have to master the basics and so forth. So, and then also from the domain of this, what is usually attributed is that the Dzogrim Nyamle, the practice of completion stage, is more important. So it was based on the recently we had in the month of March and April, we have Geshe-Gendun Seringla at the Kyudo Tantric Monastery in Tukdam for 38 days. So analyzing into his practice and so forth. So the practice of Dzogrim, the completion stage, has been attributed at the forefront of practices that he has mastered throughout the time. And then also some of the masters have said that the practice of samadhi, the meditative stabilization, is very important to be to achieve the state of tukdam at the very passing of life. And then when you talk about the research, so as I said before, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama, being at the very forefront of all aspects, His Holiness said tukdam is something mysterious, and it needs the eyes of science to look into this study of the subject. So what is there? Because forensic experts who have been at the crime scenes and so forth, they say that this is something mysterious. Something is there, but it's not something that you can easily decode into graphs and easily understood into the general terms. So when someone is believed to be in a state of tukdam, so what we usually do is that we, with the help of EEG, electroencephalographic data, we analyze what is there to understand. So, and the second thing that we usually try to understand is the presence of MMN and ABR, auditory brain stem response, and mismatch negativity. And then something that we has to be very regular is taking the temperature of the room and temperature of the body. And then also we take photos and videos, especially in times of COVID and stuff. So we cannot go straight to the body, especially if the person who has passed away is also a COVID patient. So then the photo and video is what we base upon. And then all the data that has been collected, because most of the great practitioners who have been in tukdam are in India, especially in the great monasteries that we have in the south. So we analyze and take the data and then send it to the experts in the forensic and then biomedical experts and the neuroscientists who further analyze this and try to see if there is something that can be of great benefit to this research. So the participating teams usually, it starts with His Holiness taking the initiative, and then we have Center for Healthy Minds, University of Wisconsin Medicine, primarily with the Richard Davidson's initiative. And then in 2018, we have Dr. Medvedev-led Russian scientists taking the interest in this. And we also have from Bangalore, National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS. So these three science teams are at the forefront of taking interest in this tukdam project. And at the right is the publication that we had. So in the month of January this year, we had this research article on tukdam published in the Frontiers in Psychology. So that's like the largest and the most popular literature publication in this field. So do I have a few more minutes? 2 minutes? Oh, I believe that's enough. So then, So these are usually the questions that, when you talk about tuktam, so these are the first questions that usually are posed to a person. So before I am, targeted with questions from the public, so I believe I should be clear about myself first here. So when someone says, how can you identify it's tuktam? So the first thing is that it's more like the sort of like a pause to the decomposition that usually happens when someone passes away. When someone passes away in 4 to 5 hours, you see the body getting cooled, and then you can have the odors and so forth. So when the person is in tuktam, so what you will identify is that there is no decay. The body will be in more like a state of a pause, and in the words of His Eminence Captain Samdo Rinpoche said that, at the time when Captain Rinpoche Dorje passed away, so it was on the 8th day that Captain Samdo Rinpoche went to have the blessing, and that time, as Captain Rinpoche Dorje had a prolonged illness before his passing away, still, when the Captain Rinpoche Dorje was in tuktam, what Samdo Rinpoche saw was that Captain Rinpoche Dorje, though having passed away, but is looking ever more radiant than he was while he was alive. So radiance factor, and then being in the and also usually the tuktam is in cross-leg posture, but some also prefer to remain in the sleeping lion posture that we saw with Gautama Buddha passing away, parinirvana. So then second is it necessary to be a tantric practitioner to achieve tuktam? So it's a long debatable question, because we have histories of lay person being in tuktam, and in history we talk about someone who only has been reciting Migzema, so the offering to the Rinpoche. So the person is believed to be reciting Migzema throughout his life, and the person has remained in tuktam. And then we also have a story of Sri Aurobindo, who is believed to be in a state of tuktam for 4 days when he passed away in 1950, December 5. And then the third is, how long can someone be in tuktam? So I believe it's very much with the practitioner themselves, because of owing to their own practices, their own the practice that have accumulated throughout their life, that they be it for 3 days, 7 days, 14 days, it prolongs. So it depends very much on the power of the practitioner's practice. And then the fourth is, what are the signs indicating tuktam is released? So this is very important. So when someone is in tuktam, in the words of Desangya Rinpoche, it says that when someone is in tuktam, you cannot be disturbing the person, in a sense that you cannot be carrying the funeral and so forth. Till the tuktam is released, you have to wait for this. So when the person is in tuktam, the first sign is the coming out or the releasing of the kamkama. So we say that the releasing of serum, like blood-like serum, from either from the nostrils or from the genital organs. So this is the first sign. And then, so it depends, like sometimes what happens is when the person is in a weak state, so it's not a common that it has to be both. So if the coming of the blood-like serum from the nostril doesn't happen, but it will definitely happen from the genital organs. So this is the first sign. And second sign is that when the person or the practitioner has released the tuktam, you will see the losing of the radiance straight away. And then in due couple of hours, you will sense the smell and so forth. So I will end with this beautiful quote that I like to endorse everywhere I go. So everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinzilodina. Now we have third speaker, Mr. Artisan Matu. And after Mr. Artisan Matu, we'll have QA session. And Artisan Matu is a doctoral student at Oriental in Naples, Italy, Atisha finished his Madhyamika studies in 2019 from the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in Dharamsala, India, where he was studying for the Geshe Studies program and currently lives. He was born and grew up in New Delhi, where he finished his schooling. Mr. Atisha.
So, good afternoon, firstly. And I have the fortune to follow everyone, so I can borrow a little bit on something that everyone has said. The topic that I have been given is the philosophy and chronicles of erstwhile Nalanda University. And because the time is 20 minutes and both philosophy and chronicles would require probably the same amount of time, I think I will choose to stay with the philosophy aspect first, and if time permits, then maybe briefly deal with the chronicles. The reason why I do this is because I have, like Dharamsala rightly said, thanks to the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, I have had the opportunity to study something that up till very recently was only reserved for monastics, especially Tibetan monastics. And through the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and through institutes like the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, we lay people, be them men or women, we have access to this body of knowledge. And like Khen Rinpoche Geshe Tasin Seringla said this morning, the knowledge that we have access to is the philosophy of Nalanda. So even though the way we study it is in a language which is not Sanskrit or is not an Indian language, the subjects that we're studying, the texts that we're studying are texts that belong to this Indian legacy of Nalanda. And so, because we've had so much talk today about various aspects of Nalanda and its education, I thought I could focus more on the philosophy in terms of what we study currently, which would be an indicator of what has happened in the past and what we studied in Nalanda in the past as well. So to get an understanding of this, I thought it might be helpful to kind of use as an example the current modern institutes of education that we have. And like Geshe-ma so eloquently mentioned, make the distinction in what the field of focus is between modern education and Indian education. And of course, we have Nalanda, like Geshe Abdullah said, which is part of the Indian education of the past. So, like we have the modern educational institutions in India, we have the famous ones, which would be the IITs or the AIMS. And every country would have their own. The ones that are most commonly well known, of course, are like, say, Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard, Brown, Yale. These are all institutes of educational excellence that have been around for hundreds of years, some of them. But their focus is on the material sciences. So like Geshe-ma mentioned so well, there was this time where the scientific revolution decided to focus on the material world as its field of study. And the material world would be primarily comprised of that which our senses perceive. So that which is perceived by our senses became the main body of study and focus of modern education. Now, because it isn't easy to just focus on one aspect, this study of the modern sciences, of course, had to branch off into different fields. And all of these fields with their own specializations led to a holistic or a comprehensive understanding of the material world. So we see the study of the laws that govern the material world would be the study of physics. The components of the material world would be the study of chemistry. The study of the living world would be biology. Then there was the study of mathematics, geology, astronomy, botany, and the list is endless. But these were all focusing on various facets of the material world. What is interesting to notice is these are institutions of education that are meant for higher level studies. So these are specialized fields of study. But because of the relevance of these forms of study or these educational systems, what we found was that this body of knowledge trickled into the schooling of the entire world. So as students who have been brought up in the 21st century, we find our modern education in the schools, being primary, middle school, and secondary school, the result of the research and the findings of these educational institutions of modern education. Now, Nalanda is similar, and along with Nalanda, we should also remember that there were other institutes in India, such as Vikramashila, Udanta, Puri, Takshashila in Afghanistan. And generally, these would be the Buddhist ones, but the non-Buddhist ones had a very similar model. The difference would be that their focus was no longer on the material world, but it was more on the internal world. So we can differentiate the internal sciences from the external sciences. And the Indian tradition or the Asian tradition has been focusing on the internal sciences for a much longer time. Like all the previous speakers had mentioned, the reason for this is because it is the interaction of the interior world with the external world that determines one's well-being and one's state of happiness or otherwise. And so the subjects or the terms that we can use to define the various facets of the internal world, like we can talk about the external world, we have things like metaphysics, we have psychology, we have philosophy, we have epistemology, we have the study of grammar. Like Gishal Haktullah said, it is said that in Nalanda, there were about 60 fields of study, among which I'm just listing a few. So then we also had linguistics, we had medicine, there was the study of astronomy. Interestingly and importantly, there was also a large body of Nalanda which was devoted to the study of non-Buddhist systems. And I'll try and return to this towards the end. But as a holistic study of the internal sciences, the various facets that this study was divided into would be these subjects. Now, because these are modern terms that we use and these have Western counterparts that help us understand them, but also might determine how we think about them, I thought it might be helpful to share the traditional scholastic education as it is done to date, which is a continuation of the one that was studied in Nalanda in the past. And so in Tibetan, we call this the Shunchen Kabonga, which are the 5 great baskets of texts, for instance, the 5 great texts. And if one looks at the translation of all the Indian texts, be the sutras or shastras, which were in Sanskrit in Nalanda, when they were translated into Tibetan, they were largely divided into these 5 categories. Each one of these 5 categories in turn deals with one specific aspect of the mind and the mental state. That was the main body of studies of universities such as Nalanda. This, I also would like to stress, I believe is the true legacy of Nalanda, because what we have now is an archaeological site which is very, one has a glimpse of what it could have been, the grandeur of it, how long it had lasted, and the illustrious names of all the masters. But if one doesn't really look at what they were doing and what was their main focus, then the beauty of Nalanda or the importance of Nalanda is not as clear. And so if I can just list out these 5 topics, I'll do them with their Sanskrit terms. So the first one that is, and again, these are all studies that have been preserved in Tibet. Different schools and different institutions choose to follow them in different orders, but they all cover all of these because they provide a whole rounded understanding of one's internal working of the mind. So the first one is the Pragya Parameter, which essentially provides a basic framework of how the mind progresses from where one is now to the goal that one wishes to achieve. So like Dr. Pooja very nicely said, when we talk about nirvana or Buddhahood or whatever, there's a tendency to make it a kind of soteriological or slightly new agey thing, which is not very clear. But seen purely in psychological terms, if there are states of mental distress, which could be compared to maybe some sort of trauma, and one wants to overcome this trauma, then the overcoming of this mental trauma or distress would be a state of liberation from that. This is what is known as nirvana. Now, when you talk about different levels of the kind of mental distress or mental suffering that you overcome, then you speak of different resultant states. So the Pragya Parameter provides a mapwork of an individual based on their predispositions and their abilities of the entire groundwork from now till whatever goal one wishes to attain. So it's like a student who would have studied this would have an entire idea of the entire path of what it would imply or what it would incur when they would have to engage in the practices to be able to get to their final goal. So it's an identification of the mental problems. It's trying to find and identify the antidotes, and it's trying to prove that this is doable, and then all the steps that are involved in getting there. So that would be the first study of the Pragya Parameter. Then there is a study of Madhyamika, which is generally the most popular one. And because it's so fundamental, it has gained its popularity. And this primarily deals with, literally it's translated as the middle way. And so it's identifying the root cause. So again, if we're talking about mental distress, what has always been stressed, like His Holiness says, and the Buddha has always said, the root cause of our mental distress is some sort of misconstrued or misapprehension. So it can be called ignorance. It's known as avidya traditionally in India. Identifying the various forms of ignorance and the various forms of avidya and trying to counteract them with the correct antidotes. So that would be the study of Madhyamika. So when one engages in all these practices and the path that one does, what is the understanding that has to underlie all of this? That will then lead to the resultant state would be the study of Madhyamika. Like Geshima before mentioned, there is great talk in Buddhist literature and Buddhist philosophy of the emotional state. And so in the Abhidharma, which would be the third topic, it's like a compendium or an encyclopedic phenomenology of all the various categories of Buddhist understanding or Buddhist knowledge, including which there are, of course, the material world and how it was created, and the corresponding mental states and all the emotional states that a person goes through, be them valid, not valid, harmful, beneficial, whatever that might be. And so a student who has gone through the study of Abhidharma is equipped with all the categories that are required for one to understand what the mind and its processes are comprised of. Now, like in modern science, we have mathematics. The language that was used in the traditional studies is pramana. And so that would be the fourth subject that was studied. And roughly it would translate into epistemology, but essentially it's the language of thought in the sense that when you are told certain things and you have to deal with certain information, it isn't sufficient, and it has never been in the history of this country sufficient to say, I accept this because it sounds right, or because this is my upbringing, or because this is my cultural affiliation. Until an individual is equipped with the tools to understand and verify this for themselves, they were not encouraged to devote themselves entirely to this. So because there must be some study that equips a person with how to think about it and understand how to distinguish from valid or not valid, there was this enormous importance placed on the study of Praman. This is common, of course, to the Buddhist and non-Buddhist tradition. And this is precisely what His Holiness praises so much these days when he says, in the study of whatever one does, so irrespective of the information or the content that one is dealing with, to have the tool of Praman, logic or epistemology is fundamental in permitting the individual to gain certainty in what they are doing and what they wish to attain. And then, of course, the fifth subject would be Vinaya, or like Kailash spoke this morning, it would be the ethical conduct that one should engage in when living in a community, because Nalanda and these are monastic institutions where people had to live in community. So until the mind has attained a level of refinement where it is freed of all of these negative states, the conduct, be it verbal or physical, could be harmful. And so how to abstain from this kind of conduct to create a harmonious environment. And then, like Dr. Tenzin Lodala spoke of, there was also the study of Tantra, which was, of course, reserved for certain select individuals, but was a lot of psychophysical processes on how to make a strong impact. So this is kind of an overview of what was studied in Nalanda, the basic curriculum that Nalanda would have studied. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama praises the 17 Pandits of Nalanda, it's interesting to notice that each one of these Pandits that His Holiness praises is for their contribution to one of these 6 fields of knowledge. So it is the 6 fields of knowledge and their importance in a holistic understanding of the mental world that His Holiness deems so important to have praised 17 Nalanda masters for their contribution to this field of knowledge, this body of education. I would also like to stress that these Nalanda masters that His Holiness praises, starting from Arya Nagarjuna to Dipankara Shri Gyan, spanned from 1,000 centuries. So we aren't talking about 100 years or 200 years. We're talking about a rigorous, in-depth look at how the mind is, how it works, identifying mental states, identifying the problems, identifying antidotes that have been refined over 1,000 years. And then this 1,000-year body of knowledge, unfortunately, seemed to vanish in India, but it remained in our culture and our customs and our way of thinking. Fortunately, the Tibetans took it, and so like Ken Rinpoche spoke this morning, it was taken completely to Tibet. It was, of course, commented on, it was made deeper, and it was made more alive, and it has continued. And His Holiness always says this, which is a twist of fate. The future of Tibet and what happened to Tibet because of the Chinese has resulted in the Tibetans being in exile in India. And along with being in exile, they have re-established the educational institutions here. And so we as Indians, I think, me, myself being an Indian, there is a certain amount of gratitude and respect that we should have towards His Holiness Dalai Lama for recognizing something that is essentially ours. It's Indian. It's our own legacy. Not only is it ours and went from us to a lot of Asian countries. So it is a recognition of something that belonged to our past that is dwindling, but we have the fortune, thanks to the Tibetans and the preservation of this education, that we can now borrow this and we can now revive it in our own country and in Asia, because we have maybe an emotional affinity with it, because it belonged to our past and it has trickled into our character and our psyche. Now, this obviously, an advantage of this kind of revival of traditional Indian education of the mind is that it permits both aspects of our humans to be addressed. One is the external world, which is undeniably important, and current education shows that we have made great progress in it. But if this education is done to the detriment of the internal world, where it somehow gets shunned, then there is an incomplete understanding of the entire universe of the world that we live in. And so to address this second sphere of humanity, of ourselves, this education, which is the education of the mind, or psychology as it is called oftentimes in modern studies, is something that even the modern educational world is looking at with greater importance, because they find its relevance in our world. Now, this psychology we have had in India for 2,500 years. Since the time of the Buddha, non-Buddhist psychology existed prior to that. We're not talking about something that is new. We have something that is, it's in our roots, it's old, and it's really profound. And so thanks to organizations like the IBC and IBD and all the people who are trying to revive this in India, especially the IBC, because of its support from the Indian government and its reach, I believe that if we are able to revive this kind of education in India, the same way that modern education has trickled into the schools, this kind of education would automatically also trickle into the scholastic system. So people from a young age would be made aware of not only the external world, but also all of the tools that are required for an individual to deal with all the problems that we will face as time goes on. So like the great Western education has trickled into the schools, we can have a revival first, of course, of the higher learning of this Nalanda's legacy, and then have it trickle into the schools in a very large scale way. And therefore the institutions such as IBC, of course, the work of His Holiness the Dalai Lama has to be noted, and of all the institutions that can do this, have a great role to play in being able to revive such a thing. And because I have 3 minutes, I'll try and focus on the other thing, which is just a story from the very beginning of Nalanda. So this is my attempt at the chronicle, even though it's not an entire chronology. And I think this story might be helpful to illustrate the spirit with which this thing was done. So like Geshe Harkullah said, the most important thing is dialogue. So this has always been done in a very open-minded, very intellectually stimulating manner of dialogue. So the story goes, in the past in India, the tradition was that when there was a debate between a Buddhist and a non-Buddhist, whoever lost the debate would have to convert to the other school of thought. So there was this time when Nalanda, there was a non-Buddhist, a Shaivite master, Matracheta, I believe. He had defeated a lot of the scholars in Nalanda, the Buddhist scholars, and therefore they had to convert and become disciples of this non-Buddhist scholar. So Nalanda, in this moment of distress, sends out a message to Nagarjuna, Arya Nagarjuna, who is in Andhra in South India. And because he's too old at the time, he decides to send his disciple who he trained, who is Acharya Aryadeva. In the training that Nagarjuna gives to Acharya Aryadeva, the training involves that Arya Nagarjuna has to take on the position of the adversary. So this is also indicative of how much knowledge has to go, or understanding of mental flexibility a person requires in positing one's own view, that you have to first know what the adversary says. And Arya Nagarjuna's understanding of the opponent's position was so strong that Acharya Aryadeva, apparently, the story says that he took off his sandal and was about to strike Arya Nagarjuna because he believed he was a non-Buddhist, for how strongly he was able to hold on to this position. Then Acharya Aryadeva, of course, goes to Nalanda. The story goes that he defeats this non-Buddhist master. The non-Buddhist converts to Buddhism, and he has composed a work known as the 150 stanzas of praise to the Buddha. So this method of dialogue, of debate, of discussion, of open-mindedness was the way it had developed in India, which is why it permitted it to last for so long, reach out to so many people and be of such great benefit. So instead of just doing things because one feels they are correct or blindly with a sort of bias, if we can incorporate this understanding of Nalanda and the methodology implied by them, like all the previous speakers have said, and because I believe this is the last session of the day, just to reiterate, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, in his fourth wish, a revival of Indian education at a higher level, at a senior level, at a middle school level, at a primary school level is a very possible thing that provides a holistic understanding to our world. And this is something that if lost, it's very difficult to revive, but because it is still very much there, if we can hold on to it and make it flourish, it would be of great benefit, of course, to India and to all the Buddhist countries, but also the non-Buddhist countries, like Jitsuma Tenzin Palmo said, who are showing such genuine interest towards these forms of study. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Artisan Matu. Now we'll have QA session for 15 minutes. And before you ask a question, please be specific to whom you want to ask a question to. Name the speakers and please be specific. Okay, now we will open the Q&A session for 15 minutes.
So, hello, Dr. Tenzin Lodala. I want to ask you the question. So, just before you explain sonas, the Thukdam or post-meditative state. So, this question to Dr. Tenzin Lodala. So, I want to ask that on Thukdam or post-meditative state, so what kind of meditation? Because basically there are two types of meditation, or calm abiding or analytical. So, the person who is staying in Thukdam, so in which kind of meditative state he remains or she remains?
Fields are not my field of specialization, so I'm very amateurish, so I don't think I can do any justice here. So if I'm to do any blind case, I would say it's single-pointed meditation. So that comes into play when it's time for Thukdam. So, but it's just my point, my piece of opinion, and I cannot say what really it is because it's beyond my understanding. Sorry to disappoint you.
Any other questions?
My question is for Mr. Tenzin La. Sorry, Wandela. Your topic finds me quite interesting, quite unique regarding the Thukdam, the practice of Thukdam. As you have mentioned, the each elements that are dissolved to one another, like elements like earth dissolve into water, fire, wind, and surface. Even again, you have mentioned that, but still internal breathing is still there. So I just want to know, Thukdam happens in the during that process, or Thukdam happens after that process?
Let's be seated. So this has lately been a topic of great debate, especially with the recent conference of His Holiness the Great Dalai Lama with the Russian scientists, where His Holiness struck up something that I believe no one has heard before. So the general understanding is Thukdam happens when the 25 grosser level of dissolution has happened, and then it enters into the subtle, where we have 3 visions. And when 3 visions passes away, then we reach a stage that is called Chivavise. So that is the clear light of the death. So that is the general understanding. That's when where Tukdam is happening. So taking into the consideration that there is a residual heat, mainly at the thoracic level. So what His Holiness suggested is that if this is happening, then it should be somewhere when the grosser level of dissolution is happening, because heat is very much there. So this is, I would say, something to study that His Holiness has pointed out. So in the debates that we had, later to this in our monthly session, the question, what really came to the point is that, we should be having more on this. So that's where we are actually.
It's not actually the questions, but I'm just wondering, like, what would be the prime? I mean, like, it's for Atisha, Mr. Atisha. Okay. What would be the prime reasons behind the disintegrations of Nalindo wisdom in India?
I think there's various reasons that are given. If you just look historically, there's certain conditions that are attributed to Islamic invasions. Then there seemed to be that there was some sort of predominance with tantric practices, which led the lay communities or the majority of people to have a slightly distorted opinion of the monastics. And so there was a slight misunderstanding. And then there was some internal conflict between Buddhists and other traditions. And so all of this somehow culminated over a succession of years for the eradication of Nalanda, and then generally Buddhism throughout the Indian subcontinent. So it's a multitude of factors. I don't think there's any agreement on it being any one particular factor.
My question is for Tanzania. You mentioned that certain data were gathered, such as mismatch negativity and auditory brainstem response. Can you tell us a little bit about these things and what did the data find using these 2 investigations?
So as I said before in my presentation, with the interest of the Western science or the Indian science, particularly starting with the engagement of the Center for Healthy Minds. So this collection of data happened. So I believe it has started somewhere in 2012-13. Until now, we have like cases of 18 Tukdam, the masters who have remained in Tukdam. So the data that we have collected, so the primary role that we have been doing is the collection of the data and sending it to the labs in the Wisconsin. So more of an idea on this, I believe you can find it in the article that has been published this year. So, but I believe, difficulty is in the understanding, because, when you talk about the subtle understanding of things, when we talk about Tukdam, it's more on the subtle and more subtle. So the technological, advancement that we have witnessed for now, I somehow feel that it's not there to take it all in, because, right now the primary research that is being done is the understanding is that when someone passes away, is there still something that's happening in the brain? Is there a stimulus happening, something like that? So the research, I believe, is very much at the start of it. So, to reach to a conclusion, I believe I cannot do justice here, because it's an ongoing, and even in the, if you look into the, I would say that the published article, so the data that they have also present, they say it's something at the start of it. So it's more like the entry into this kind of research. So yeah, I don't know if I can give a yes or no answer to this.
Hello. So this is also for Tenzin Lurina, and maybe also on a philosophical level, maybe of any of the others. So I believe or thought that in order to cause something, it needs to be a similar cause to have a similar result. So if we say that the elements dissolve into each other, I wonder how that actually on a philosophical level works, is if we say, for example, that wind energy dissolves into space, wind element dissolves into space element, whereas the space element, in my understanding, how can that be like the other way around? How can the wind element be a cause for the space element? So basically, I'm wondering how can like cause and effect relationship work in this?
Yeah. When you talk about the elements, so elements need to be understood on different levels. We talk about elements also on the grosser level, subtle level, and more subtle level. Where when you talk about elements, as I said before at the front, we need to understand it more on the energy level, because when we talk about elements, we need to understand in the particle, subparticle at its very, the smallest form of level. Because in any form, there is the presence of 5 elements. So when we say something concrete like then earth, or when we talk about the cell phone, so basic understanding is that it's more of the earth because of its solidification, but it has the presence of all the 5 elements. The mere fact is that the earth element takes the most, space of the ingredients, most percentage level. So when we talk about the elements, so it is a collection of all the forces. So when you talk about the dissolution of one element in another, it's weakening of the part, because when we say that the earth element dissolves into water, it's not like earth element is no longer, and then something happens or something, earth element's energy is transferred into water element and so forth. It's more like earth element. It's something like when you have 5, when you have 5 legs holding something, and when you have earth element going missing, that is 1 element missing, then it's 4 legs holding a substance. So it's more like energy of the other elements taking at the forefront. So in a way, everything, even the smallest of thing, is an entity or product of all 5 elements. So when you say it's water element, the water element level is taking most of the percentage, though it has all the other elements. So it's not like east, west, south, north at a very distinct part. So it's everything being together, yet something surpassing the level in the form. I don't know if I've decoded it well.
Next, we have Geshe-Tashi Srila for the question. Geshe-Tashi Srila.
I don't have a question. I would like to contribute a little bit one of those 2 questions. The first question raised which kind of meditation, either single-pointed or analytical meditation, would be used for the Tukdam. I think that that kind of interpretation is very narrow understanding of meditation. Of course, shamatha and vipassana meditations are these 2 are very, very general terms. And therefore, we must, try to understand meditation a little bit broader. For example, as Tenzin La mentioned, through the highest yoga tantra deity meditation, these 8 dissolutions are, imitated during the meditation, during the training. And when actual death process occur, when these process take place, then the meditator may able to, utilize his or her sort of, the understanding of the processes going through. So therefore, that's the one thing. And the second thing is the Tukdam here, very general sort of meaning of Tukdam is somebody who is able to control his or her actual death processes, going through these, technically talk about 8 stages, and really able to recognize or experience going through these 8 stages. When his or her last stage, which is the clear light mind, occur, when he or she is able to meditate at that level, that is really the Tukdam take place. It is not just that the person's body stays for 3 or 1 or 2 weeks, not really decomposed. That alone will not count as that person is in a Tukdam. That's one thing which some may need a little bit clarification on that. Thank you.
Now, do you have one last question?
This is a question for Geshe-la and Atisha-la. If we speak about the Nalanda tradition and the revival in India and perhaps Asia in a broader sense, we speak about revival, but in Europe and the American continent, it's more like an introduction. Does it require something different to let it flourish in Asia and let it flourish in Europe and the American continent and perhaps also more Middle East?
How's this going to work? Tisha, do you want to go ahead and just talk? Can everyone hear me? Yes?
Geshe-la, go ahead. Please go ahead. Please.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe I'll just address the side of Europe, and this is just a personal opinion, of course. But the sense I get is that it should be taught also in the language, well, combined with, of course, scientific understanding. So a lot of the difficulty that Westerners face is when they are introduced in the Nalanda tradition is the terminology. And so possibly to find a way in which the meaning, of course, remains the same is explained. Well, the meaning doesn't get lost. However, that the means such as, well, the language, vocabulary is adjusted in a certain way. I think that will make it more beneficial, will make it more accessible. So I think that would be something with regard to the West. And so maybe Atisha would like to add something to the reintroduction in India.
I think India is slightly easier because a lot of it, like a lot of times, what you're trying to transmit is transmitted through, like Geshe-la said, through words and terminology that are culturally appropriate or socially appropriate for a certain place. Because a lot of the terminology and the concepts that are being transmitted by Buddhist teaching already use this kind of language. In a country like India, you don't have to kind of, like Geshe-la was very rightly saying, you don't have to strip away certain cultural nuances that are preventing other cultures from understanding it. So that's something that in India is a lot easier to do. Like Geshe-la said, outside with terminology and vocabulary, you would have to be able to tweak it so that it makes sense to the people over there, because it's generally always done in a geographic location according to that history or culture. So that would have to be probably kept in mind. But the base message is probably, that should be unaltered. That should not be altered.
Thank you to all the questioners as well as to the speakers. Now we will have a word of thanks from Mr. Pasang Sringla, Principal College for Higher Tibetan Studies, Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Venkachi Sandhya members of the International Buddhist Confederation, speakers, and the audience. I'm very grateful to International Buddhist Confederation and the Indian Council for Cultural Relations for jointly organizing the first regional conference in partnership with the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics here at its sister college, the College for Higher Tibetan Studies. As we wind up the day, I just want to extend my sincere word of thanks to the chief guest, Mrs. Chimitsiangla, the Secretary of the Department of Religion and Culture, Central Tibetan Administration, keynote speaker, Venerable Geshe Lagdola, Dr. Thamapaya, Secretary General, International Buddhist Confederation, and Jitsinma Tenzin Pamela for their presence and contributions to the conference during this morning. Without the 6 wonderful speakers, this conference would not have achieved its objective. I want to thank Venerable Geshe Tashit Siringla, Mr. Kailash Buddha, and Dr. Pooja Tabral for the wonderful morning session. And I also want to thank Geshe Ma Kesawamula, Dr. Tenzin Loddenla, and Artisan Matu for an equally wonderful afternoon session. This conference is possible due to the trust International Buddhist Confederation and ICCR placed on us here at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics and the College for Higher Tibetan Studies at Sarah. And I want to thank their support and the trust. I want to thank Dr. Thamapaya again and his staff for their trust, as well as working very hard with us, especially with Geshe Tenzin Thamchola, and making this conference a huge success, I believe. And finally, I'm very happy to have 4 out of 6 speakers, organizing team, IBC members, as the most of them, I think, former students of this college. Some of them have studied Tibetan language with us. Some of them, most of them had studied Tibetan language as well as the Buddhist philosophy here at the Sarah College, as well as Institute of Buddhist Dialectics. And it's so wonderful to see them finish their studies and then take a huge participation in this kind of important conferences. And I'm sure we will have many other partnership programs like this in future too. So my special thanks to Geshe Tenzin Thamchola for working so hard. And thank you also, I think without the audience, it will be just empty talk. So I want to thank all the audience, our students, as well as the audience who have participated from outside, especially the members from the Tibet Policy Institute for this first regional conference, Legacies of Nalanda Tradition, Scholarships, and Practice. So I think we will have more such conferences in future, and your participation and also the trust and support from International Buddhist Confederation to us, we really would appreciate and look forward to working with you. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Gepasanla. With this, we end our first regional conference. Thank you all. Now it's a tea break.